Economic Assassination of Nations. 1. The Risk of Writing. This book is more like an autobiography of John Perkins. Perkins says that he started to write it 4 times in 20 years, but each time he stopped, either under threat or by corruption, and some advised him to preserve himself and save his life by writing this book as a novel. The creative space in the novel will give a confused impression between reality and fiction, but in it was always a desire to reveal the facts and not just to write for the sake of writing. John Perkins is one of the economic hitmen, or as some call them EHM, a group of professionals whose task is to subjugate all the weak and developing countries rich in oil and natural resources to the United States and its economy represented by corporate America. All of this is done without the need to mobilize armies and weapons and attack the countries with violence, murder and blood, as was the case in the previous colonial era. Just as the era has developed technologically in a way that represents a boom, it has also developed politically, and the intervention is taking place as if the U.S. and its institutions were giving a hand to those poor countries that need someone to save them.
To United Nations institutions as auxiliaries of colonialism. Among the most important means that help the economic pirates to accomplish their tasks, besides false reports and bribes and all these things, are the institutions of the United Nations represented by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank and the World Trade Organization created by the American President Nixon under the title Bretton Woods system, which abolished gold and made the dollar the world's basic currency, which is equivalent to $35 an ounce of gold. This system that America imposed on all countries of the world without exception, the strong and the weak, sometimes under the pretext of providing loans and aid to third world countries, and eradicating poverty and famine, and at other times represented with arrogance in the speech of Nixon's response by saying, "When you lose, you have to change the rules of the game." The truth is that no one and no country could stop these organizations from accomplishing the tasks they set for themselves. In the end, the result became that these institutions went on their way, but what is strange is that all the countries that these institutions claim to have helped are deteriorating. Poor countries are getting poorer, and their starving populations are getting hungry, and these institutions are just a means to help these hacks in accomplishing their tasks. 3. The missions and consequences of economic hackers. The task of these hackers is to make these developing and poor nations owe everything to the United States, and the more resources these nations have, especially oil, the more debt they owe. Here, the United States can take advantage of this situation in several ways available at the same time. The first way is to provide loans to these countries to carry out infrastructure, education and development projects, etc., but this will force them to use their companies. Not only that, but, of course, there are benefits with astronomical figures that the poor country will have to pay, so the debt will increase and multiply on its own, and the ability to pay will weaken with time. Here is the second way, which is to force a country into complete submission, either by giving up specific resources, decisions, or a piece of land that the United States thinks it can use for the benefit of its economy and profitably. So, quite simply, these countries are occupied authoritatively, materially and in every way possible, without armies and without bloody fighting. This can be summed up in what John Perkins himself said: "What we economic hackers do so well is build a global empire."
For does it end there? The truth is that depending on the different countries, their different cultures and resources, the production of their national income, and all those things that are not similar from one country to another, it is not possible to claim that the task of the economic hacker will always produce the expected results. Here we see that there are other teams that are more important, and that it is not just a group trained in economic tricks. Just as there is an economic pirate, there is another group under the name of the Foxes. It is this gang that has bloody tricks, not economic this time, and that can embarrass any country that does not go according to its plan. It also happened with two Latin American presidents, Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos, president of Panama. When each of them opposed U.S. attempts to dominate their countries, the result was their assassination. Both were killed in two horrific accidents. 5. Saudi Arabia is a model. During Egypt's war with Israel in 1973, in response to U.S. financial, moral and global support for Israel, Sadat pressured King Faisal to discipline the U.S. and avenge it for the support it provided to Israel. At that time, Iran, the founder of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, along with 5 other Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, raised the price of exported oil by 70%, because this was not a sufficient threat to the United States. On October 17, these countries agreed to cut their oil production by 5% each month, and some other countries announced a 10% cut. Nor would this have made the United States give up its obstinacy. On October 19, and only 2 days after these decisions, which the Arabs believed would prompt the United States to meet their political demands, President Nixon asked Congress for $2.2 billion to help Israel. At that time, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia completely stopped the export of oil, but despite the fact that this pressure tactic was in the interest of the Arabs, and their war with Israel, and the imposition of their influence on the United States at that time, in the long run, this ban became a great curse for the kingdom. The United States learned this lesson well. As a result, it contributed to the strengthening of the American triad, big business, international banks and government, and was determined to make up for all the losses suffered by the United States during the embargo period, and even to ensure that this incident would not happen again, and through the pirates of the economy. This became easily and without feeling the other country plots, but believes that it is in its interest.
6. John Perkins and his role in Saudi Arabia. The first thing that caught the attention of John Perkins as an economic hacker in this country that has a lot of money in oil, Saudi Arabia, are those sheep that roam the streets of the capital even in front of the most important political buildings to eat. When Perkins asked why, some people told him that a Saudi could not accept himself in such a job. The U.S. plan in Saudi Arabia began with a need to help it advance civilization, establishing infrastructure projects, dispensing with sheep for garbage collection and using machines instead, dispensing with Bedouin tents and appearances, and establishing shopping malls and huge stores that are completely similar to the United States. The tragedy is not only that this agreement has not only helped the U.S. get its money back, provide a new market and new job opportunities for its big companies, but also establish high-tech security and maintenance programs that the Saudis could not manage without the need of the U.S. Therefore, Saudi Arabia will always be subject to the U.S., and if it tries to ban oil again, it will expose all of its buildings and its current civilization to destruction. The cost of this whole agreement, and all John Perkins did to persuade the royal family to accept it, was a blonde beauty who sent her to the home of one of the princes of the royal family to live with him in his private suite for a fixed price, period, and a specific contract, and then return to his country. 7. The United States and Saudi Arabia and the terrorism industry. When international relations reach such a degree of entanglement, it becomes necessary to allow some excesses as long as they are not contrary to the interests of each state, and also to the common interests. Therefore, the United States did not take a stand against Saudi Arabia's hiding of the Ugandan dictator Idi Amin and did not grant him political asylum during his exile in 1979. More than that, the two countries, with different goals and interests for each of them, financed Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan to confront the Soviet Union with an estimated $3.5 billion. And Saudi Arabia didn't care if the U.S. got rid of as soon as he got his wish. Then he again turned a blind eye to the interest and security of the country. The press published the reality of the close relationship between the ruling Al Saud family and the Bush family on the one hand and the Bin Laden family on the other hand, which made America turn a blind eye to the events of September 11. A few days after this incident, members of the wealthy Saudi Arabia and members of the Bin Laden family left in private planes that were not allowed to be searched or even interrogated. 8. The Iranian Model. Before the beginning. Iran is one of the most important oil exporting countries, but all its oil production is subject to the monopoly of England, represented by one of its major companies, while colonialism revealed its face narcissistically, without fear, and not by hidden means. Conspiracies, as it has become recently. But in 1953, a coup led by Mohammad Mossadegh and the nationalization of Iranian oil production, rejected the brutal and inhumane conditions in which Iranian workers were working in this enterprise, and the deterioration of their standard of living and health. They produced the resources of their country, but they cannot enjoy it. Here, England pressured the Shah as much as it could, but Mossadegh's strength, and the strength of the people with him, was hard to dissuade anyone, especially when the people discovered that they were insulted, exploited, and oppressed. England turned to the United States for help, but the options available were very limited. Military intervention could anger the Soviet Union, which was stalking Iran's borders, and turn a battle to deter Iran into a military war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Therefore, only conspiracy was possible.
9. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. and the consolidation of a new idea. The United States sent Kermit Roosevelt on a covert operation called Ajax, to overthrow the Democratic Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, restore Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and restore Britain's influence over Iranian oil. This was done with numerous bribes and the mobilization of paid crowds to demonstrate for the Shah and his return. The Shah's regime was also involved in the assassination of Mossadegh, and attacking Mossadegh in his house and breaking it. Thus, after the success of the conspiracy policy, there is no need for massive political and military interventions. Everything can be done in the shadow. A new phase began and new armies were prepared that had various weapons, including the Economic Pirate Division, Fox Division and others. 10. Post-coup Iran, the return of the Shah and relations with the U.S. The United States believed the lie they themselves had made, represented by the Iranian people's love for the Shah, and the truth is that the Shah, after his return to power after deposing Mossadegh, made many decisions that suggest that he is taking the side of labor, such as the distribution of a large number of land owned by some individuals to peasants. In addition to many social, economic and especially military reforms, the Iranian army became one of the largest and most powerful armies in the Islamic Middle East. But all these decisions were not to prevent this revolution that was secretly boiling, led by the clergy, headed by Ayatollah Khomeini, who despite his distance and not getting involved in the conflict that was raging between Mohammad Mossadegh and the Shah, but after the return of the Shah began to call the Iranians to rebellion and revolution, and ignited their enthusiasm with his speeches that later overturned all the plans and interests of the United States and Iran. 11. Indonesian Model. Indonesia, or the ancient Spice Islands, this place with which the Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch and even the British fought until the Netherlands finally won in 1750, after which Japan came during World War II to try to invade this place. The Dutch surrendered to the Japanese, a few attempts at resistance emerged, giving power back to the people led by Ahmed Sukarno, who would later become Indonesia's first president. But this poor place was never calm. After getting rid of the external colonizer, comes tribal fanaticism, conflict between the different cultures and ethnicities that populate Indonesia, as well as the many local dialects spoken by its inhabitants. But Sukarno managed to control the situation and Indonesia became a socialist country. country. Here, the United States found an excuse to intervene and absorb the wealth of this small country under the pretext of protecting it from communism. With this argument, the Indonesian government, the Asian Development Bank and USAID cooperated and sent a committee, including John Perkins, to investigate the situation in Indonesia and the opportunities to establish development projects there. This committee is sent from the beginning with conclusions that it must include in its report, as different and even obviously incompatible with these conclusions. It must make the loans so huge that they cannot be repaid and at the same time provide very optimistic results as to the returns of these projects and their safety, regardless of the risks to which they may be exposed. This can be summed up in what John Perkins said: "We in the developed world are the real beneficiaries of natural resources and wealth, and the people in the developing world are the ones who help us get those resources. Have natural resources to suffice them versus those who have the resources and don't have the power to protect the resources."
12 Panama Model. Panama is a small country created by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the Frenchman who supervised the construction of the Suez Canal, after Panama belonged to Colombia, and despite the pressure exerted by the United States on Colombia to abandon it and transfer it to the trusteeship of the North American Confederation of Companies, Colombia refused. In 1903, the era of military colonialism, and before this neocolonialism carried out with conspiracies and debts, the United States under the presidency of Roosevelt at the time sent a fleet that captured the local militia forces and killed them and declared Panama an independent state with a nominal minority government composed of wealthy families whose purpose is nothing more than the protection of American interests in Panama. It imposed its control and presence on this small country. In 1968, Panama's history was completely transformed. A coup d'état overthrew Arnulfo Arias, the last of a succession of dictators, and was replaced by Omar Torrijos, whose reign would further transform the course of Panama's history. Omar Torrijos was a very popular leader, respected and esteemed not only by his people but by the whole world. His most important objective was the liberation of Panama from American imperialism and the affirmation of its right to independence and to enjoy its resources and lands in a way that suited it. 13 Panama and the restoration of sovereignty. It happened during this period of taking over the presidency of the United States, Carter, who was looking for more peace, reducing his country's dependence on oil and looking for other sources of energy to obtain cleaner, safer and more abundant energy. Reached an agreement with which Panama regained its sovereignty, and Omar Torrijos began to think about projects that could benefit his state and generate profits to help the workers. Among the projects he aspired to was cooperation with Japan to develop the canal, which meant that American companies would lose a project that would have injected them with billions of dollars, and the United States itself would lose its sovereignty and control over Panama as long as they did not fall under the weight of debt. The United States sent John Perkins, who recounts his conversation with Omar Torrijos and how this confident and charismatic leader managed to control Perkins, the failure of the economic pirates, and it's time for a Fox Squad. Omar Torrijos was killed in a horrific plane explosion in 1981, and Manuel Noriega took power after him. Canal project with the Japanese. 14 Panama and the sudden invasion. The economic pirates failed, and the foxes failed after them, and the last option remains, the most brutal and bloody, which is to move the armies. On December 20, 1989, the whole world was afraid when it found the United States burying small Panama, whose population does not exceed 2 million people, and wandering the streets burning and killing. The press was denied access and reports were falsified on the number of casualties and displaced persons as a result of this unjustified war. Noriega was arrested and sent to the United States, tried, and it is ironic that he is being tried because he was a president who exercised influence and power in his country, not for his corruption. America went to war against Panama without any rights, which caused outrage throughout the world, especially since Panama was not a hotbed of socialism, nor of communism, nor did it threaten the national security of the United States, but only sought independence. It was not a threat to the national security of the United States, but only sought independence. The same unjustified war will be waged by Iraq against Kuwait in less than 2 years, and the United States will criticize it, even if they have done the same, and even take it as a pretext to invade Iraq, which the United States could not control, not even the economic pirates he sends.